The full committee report is 6,700 pages long. 7 years, I repeat, in the making. The unclassified executive summary is going to be released today is more than 500 pages. I want everyone to understand that the Select Committee on Intelligence, along with the House Committee on Intelligence, the only group of people who provide oversight over our intelligence community. And they actually have the ability to investigate what happened. No one else, not the press, not the senators, nor the public or outside organizations actually have the ability to investigate the CIA. But we did it. And the implications of this report are profound. Not only is torture wrong, but it doesn't work. And for people today, we hear them coming from different places saying it was great, it was terrific what we did. It got us so much, got us nothing except a bad name. Without this report, the American people would not know what actually took place under the CIA's torture program. This critical report highlights the importance of Senate oversight and the role that Congress must play in overseeing the executive branch of government. The only way our country can put this episode in the past is to come to terms with what happened and commit to ensuring it will never happen again. This is how we, as Americans, make our nation stronger. When we realize there's a problem, we seek the evidence. We study it, we learn from it, and then we set about to enact change. Americans must learn from our mistakes. We learned about the Pentagon Papers. They were helpful to us as a country. The Iran-Contra affair, I was here when that went on. It was hard on us, but it was important that we did this. And more recently, what happened in that prison in Iraq, Abu Ghraib. Mr. President, we have three separate branches of government: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branch of government. To me, this work done by the Intelligence Committee, of which the presiding officer is a member, cries out for a constitution. Three separate, equal branches of government. We're here today to talk about the work done by the legislative branch of government. We can protect our national security, Mr. President, as a country without resorting to methods like torture. They're contrary to the fundamental values of America. So I call upon the administration, the Intelligence Committee, and my colleagues in Congress to join me in that commitment. That what took place, the torture program, was not in keeping with our country.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I want to thank the leader for his words and for his support. They are extraordinarily welcome and appreciated. Today, a 500-page executive summary of the Senate Intelligence Committee's 5.5-year review of the CIA's detention and interrogation program, which was conducted between 2002 and 2009, is being released publicly. The executive summary, which is going out today, is backed by a 6,700-page classified and unredacted report with 38,000 footnotes, which can be released, if necessary, at a later time. The report released today examines the CIA's secret overseas detention of at least 119 individuals and the use of coercive interrogation techniques, in some cases amounting to torture. Over the past couple of weeks, I've gone through a great deal of introspection about whether to delay the release of this report to a later time. This clearly is a period of turmoil and instability in many parts of the world. Unfortunately, that's going to continue for the foreseeable future, whether this report is released or not. There are those who will seize upon the report and say, see what the Americans did, and they will try to use it to justify evil actions or incite more violence. We can't prevent that, but history will judge us by our commitment to a just society governed by law and the willingness to face an ugly truth and say never again. There may never be the right time to release this report. The instability we see today will not be resolved in months or years, but this report is too important to shelve indefinitely. My determination to release it has also increased due to a campaign of mistaken statements and press articles launched against the report before anyone has had the chance to read it. As a matter of fact, the report is just now, as I speak, being released. This is what it looks like. Senator Chambliss asked me if we could have the minority report bound with the majority report. For this draft, that is not possible, but in the final draft, it will be bound together. But this is what the summary of the 6,000 pages look like. My words give me no pleasure. I'm releasing this report because I know there are thousands of employees at the CIA who do not condone what I will speak about this morning and who work day out, day and night, long hours within the law for America's security in what is certainly a difficult world. My colleagues on the Intelligence Committee and I am proud of them, just as everyone in this chamber is, and we will always support them. In reviewing the study in the past few days, with the decision looming over the public release, I was struck by a quote found on page 126 of the executive summary. It cites the former CIA Inspector General, John Helgerson, who in 2005 wrote the following to the then director of the CIA, which clearly states the situation with respect to this report years later as well. And I quote, "We have found that the agency over the decades has continued to get itself into messes related to interrogation programs for one overriding reason. We do not document and learn from our experience. Each generation of officers is left to improvise anew, with problematic results for our officers as individuals and for our agency." I believe that to be true. I agree with Mr. Helgerson. His comments are true today, but this must change. On March 11, 2009, the committee voted 14-1 to begin a review of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. Over the past 5 years, a small team of committee investigators pored over the more than 6.3 million pages of CIA records the leader spoke about to complete this report, or what we call the study. It shows that the CIA's actions a decade ago are a stain on our value and on our history. The release of this 500-page summary cannot remove that stain, but it can and does say to our people and the world that America is big enough to admit when it's wrong and confident enough to learn from its mistakes. Releasing this report is an important step to restore our values and show the world that we are in fact a just and lawful society. Over the next hour, I'd like to lay out for senators and the American public the report's key findings and conclusions. And I ask that when I complete this, Senator McCain be recognized. Before I get to the substance of the report, I'd like to make a few comments about why it's so important that we make this study public. All of us have vivid memories of that Tuesday morning when terror struck New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Make no mistake, September 11th, 2011, war was declared on the United States. Terrorists struck our financial center, they struck our military center, and they tried to strike our political center, and would have had brave and courageous passengers not brought down the plane. We still vividly remember the mix of outrage and deep despair and sadness as we watched from Washington. Smoke rising from the Pentagon, the passenger plane lying in a Pennsylvania field, the sound of bodies striking canopies at ground level as innocents jumped to the ground below from the World Trade Center. Mass terror that we often see abroad had struck us directly in our front yard, killing 3,000 innocent men, women, and children. What happened? We came together as a nation with one singular mission: bring those who committed these acts to justice. But it's at this point where the values of America come into play, where the rule of law and the fundamental principles of right and wrong become important. In 1990, the United States Senate ratified the Convention Against Torture. The convention makes clear that this ban against torture is absolute. It says, and I quote, "No exceptional circumstances whatsoever, including what I just read, whether a state of war or a threat of war, internal political instability, or any other public emergency may be invoked as a justification for torture," end quote. Nonetheless, it was argued that the need for information on possible additional terrorist plots after 9/11 made extraordinary interrogation techniques necessary. Even if one were to set aside all of the moral arguments, our review was a meticulous and detailed examination of records. It finds that coercive interrogation techniques did not produce the vital, otherwise unavailable intelligence the CIA has claimed. I will go into further detail on this issue in a moment, but let me make clear, these comments are not a condemnation of the CIA as a whole. The CIA plays an incredibly important part in our nation's security and has thousands of dedicated and talented employees. What we have found is that surprisingly few people were responsible for designing, carrying out, and managing this program. 2 contractors developed and led the interrogations. There was little effective oversight. Analysts on occasion gave operational orders that interrogations and CIA management of the program was weak and diffused. Our final report was approved by a bipartisan vote of 9-6 in December 2012 and exposes brutality in stark contrast to our values as a nation. This effort was focused on the actions of the CIA from late 2001 to January of 2009. The report does not include considerable detail on the CIA's interactions with the White House. It does include considerable detail on the CIA's interactions with the White House, the Departments of Justice, State, Defense, and the Senate Intelligence Committee. The review is based on contemporaneous records and documents during the time the program was in place and active. Now, these documents are important because they aren't based on recollection. They aren't based on revision, and they aren't a rationalization a decade later. It's these documents, referenced repeatedly in thousands of footnotes, that provide the factual basis for the study's conclusions. The committee's majority staff reviewed more than 6.3 million pages of these documents provided by the CIA, as well as records from other departments and agencies. These records include finished intelligence assessments, CIA operational and intelligence cables, memoranda, emails, real-time chat sessions, Inspector General reports, testimony before Congress, pictures, and other internal records. It's true, we didn't conduct our own interviews, and let me tell you why that was the case. In 2009, there was an ongoing review by Department of Justice Special Prosecutor John Durham. On August 24th, Attorney General Holder expanded that review. This occurred 6 months after our study had begun. Durham's original investigation of the CIA's destruction of interrogation videotapes was broadened to include possible criminal actions of CIA employees in the course of CIA detention and interrogation activities. At the time, the committee's vice chairman, Kit Bond, withdrew the minority's participation in the study, citing the Attorney General's expanded investigation as the reason. The Department of Justice refused to coordinate its investigation with the Intelligence Committee's review. As a result, possible interviewees could be subject to additional liability if they were interviewed. And the CIA, citing the Attorney General's investigation, would not instruct its employees to participate in interviews. Notwithstanding this, I am really confident of the factual accuracy and comprehensive nature of this report for 3 reasons. First, it's the 6.3 million pages of documents reviewed, and they reveal records of actions as those actions took place, not through recollections more than a decade later. Second, the CIA and CIA's senior officers have taken the opportunity to explain their views on CIA detention and interrogation operations. They have done this in on-the-record statements and classified committee hearings, written testimony and answer to questions, and through the formal response to the committee in June 2013 after reading the study. And third, the committee had access to and utilized an extensive set of reports of interviews conducted by the CIA Inspector General and the CIA's oral history program. So while we could not conduct new interviews of individuals, we did utilize transcripts or summaries of interviews of those directly engaged in detention and interrogation operations. These interviews occurred at the time the program was operational and covered the exact topics we would have asked about had we conducted interviews ourselves. These interview reports and transcripts included, but were not limited to, the following: George Tenet, director of the CIA, when the agency took custody and interrogated the majority of detainees; Jose Rodriguez, director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, a key player in the program; CIA General Counsel Scott Mueller; CIA Deputy Director of Operations James Pavitt; CIA Acting General Counsel John Rizzo; and CIA Deputy Director John McLaughlin; and a variety of interrogators, lawyers, medical personnel, senior counterterrorism analysts, and managers of the detention and interrogation program. The best place to start about how we got into this, and I'm delighted that Senator Rockefeller is on the floor, is a little more than 8 years ago, on September 6, 2006, when the committee met to be briefed by then Director Michael Hayden. At that 2006 meeting, the full committee learned for the first time, of the use of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, or EITs. It was a short meeting, in part because President Bush was making a public speech later that day, disclosing officially for the first time the existence of CIA black sites and announcing the transfer of 14 detainees from CIA custody to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. It was the first time the interrogation program was explained to the full committee, as details had previously been limited to the chairman and vice chairman. Then on December 7th, 2007, the New York Times reported that CIA personnel in 2005 had destroyed videotapes of the interrogation of 2 CIA detainees, the CIA's first detainee, Abu Zubaydah, as well as Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri. The committee had not been informed of the destruction of the tapes. Days later, on December 11, 2007, the committee held a hearing on the destruction of the videotapes. Director Hayden, the primary witness, testified that the CIA had concluded that the destruction of videotapes was acceptable, in part because Congress had not yet requested to see them. My source is our committee's transcript, December 11, 2007. Director Hayden stated that if the committee had asked for the videotapes, they would have been provided. But of course, the committee had not known that the videotapes existed. And we now know from CIA emails and records that the videotapes were destroyed shortly after CIA attorneys raised concerns that Congress might find out about the tapes. In any case, at that same December 11th committee hearing, Director Hayden told the committee that CIA cables related to the interrogation sessions depicted in the videotapes were, and I quote, a more than adequate representation of the tapes, and therefore, if you want them, we'll give you access to them. That's at our transcript, December 11, 2007 hearing. Senator Rockefeller, then chairman of the committee, designated 2 members of the committee staff to review the cables describing the interrogation sessions of Abu Zubaydah and al-Nashiri. Senator Bond, then vice chairman, similarly directed 2 of his staffers to review the cables. The designated staff members completed their review and compiled a summary of the content of the CIA cables by early 2009, by which time I had become chairman. The description in the cables of CIA's interrogations and the treatment of detainees presented a starkly different picture from Director Hayden's testimony before the committee. They described brutal, around-the-clock interrogations, especially of Abu Zubaydah, in which multiple coercive techniques were used in combination and with substantial repetition. It was an ugly, visceral description. The summary also indicated that Abu Zubaydah and al-Nashiri did not, as a result of the use of these so-called EITs, provide the kind of intelligence that led the CIA to stop terrorist plots or arrest additional suspects. As a result, I think it's fair to say the entire committee was concerned, and it approved the scope of an investigation by a vote of 14-1, and the work began. In my March 11, 2014 floor speech about the study, I described how in 2009, the committee came to an agreement with the new CIA director, Leon Panetta, for access to documents and other records about the CIA's detention and interrogation program, so I won't repeat that here. From 2009 to 2012, our staff conducted a massive and unprecedented review of CIA records. Draft sections of the report were produced by late 2011 and shared with the full committee. The final report was completed in December 2012 and approved by the committee by a bipartisan vote of 9-6. After that vote, I sent the full report to the president and asked the administration to provide comments on it before it was released. 6 months later, In June of 2013, the CIA responded. I directed then that if the CIA pointed out any error in our report, we would fix it. And we did fix one bullet point that did not impact our findings and conclusions. If the CIA came to a different conclusion than the report did, we would note that in the report and explain our reasons for disagreeing if we disagree. And you will see some of that documented in the footnotes of that executive summary, as well as in the 6,000 pages. In April 2014, the committee prepared an updated version of the full study and voted 12-3 to declassify and release the executive summary, findings and conclusions, and minority and additional views. On August 1, we received a declassified version from the executive branch. It was immediately apparent that the redactions to our report prevented a clear and understandable reading of the study and prevented us from substantiating the findings and conclusions. So we obviously objected. For the past 4 months, the committee and the CIA, the Director of National Intelligence, and the White House have engaged in a lengthy negotiation over the redactions to the report. We have been able to include some more information in the report today without sacrificing sources and methods of our national security. I'd like to ask, following my remarks, that a letter from the White House dated yesterday conveying the report also points out that the report is 93% complete and that the redactions amount to 7% of the bulk of the report.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, this has been a long process. The work began 7 years ago when Senator Rockefeller directed committee staff to review the CIA cables describing the interrogation sessions of Abu Zubaydah and al-Nashiri. It's been very difficult, but I believe the documentation and the findings and conclusions will make clear how this program was morally, legally, and administratively misguided, and that this nation should never again engage in these tactics. Let me now turn to the contents of the study. As I noted, we have 20 findings and conclusions, which fall into 4 general categories. First, the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques were not an effective way to gather intelligence information. Second, the CIA provided extensive amounts of inaccurate information about the operation of the program and its effectiveness to the White House, the Department of Justice, Congress, the CIA Inspector General, the media, and the American public. Third, the CIA's management of the program was inadequate and deeply flawed. And fourth, the CIA program was far more brutal than people were led to believe. Let me describe each category in more detail. The first set of findings and conclusions concern the effectiveness, or lack thereof, of the interrogation program. The committee found that the CIA's coercive interrogation techniques were not an effective means of acquiring accurate intelligence or gaining detainee cooperation. The CIA and other defenders of the program have repeatedly claimed that the use of so-called interrogation techniques was necessary to get detainees to provide critical information and to bring detainees to a, quote, state of compliance, end quote, in which they would cooperate and provide information. The study concludes that both claims are inaccurate. The report is very specific in how it evaluates the CIA's claims on the effectiveness and necessity of its enhanced interrogation techniques. Specifically, we use the CIA's own definition of effectiveness as ratified and approved by the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel. The CIA's claims that the EITs were necessary to obtain, quote, otherwise available, end quote, information that could not be obtained from any other source to stop terrorist attacks and save American lives, that's a claim we conclude is inaccurate. We took 20 examples that the CIA itself claimed to show the success of these interrogations. These include cases of terrorist plots stopped or terrorist captured. The CIA used these examples in presentations to the White House, in testimony to Congress, in submissions to the Department of Justice, and ultimately to the American people. Some of the claims are well known. The capture of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the prevention of attacks against the Library Tower of Los Angeles, and the takedown of Osama bin Laden. Other claims were made only in classified settings to the White House, Congress, and Department of Justice. In each case, the CIA claimed that critical and unique information came from one or more detainees in its custody after they were subjected to the CIA's coercive techniques. And that information led to specific counterterrorism success. Our staff reviewed every one of the 20 cases, and not a single case holds up. In every single one of these cases, at least one of the following was true. 1, the intelligence community had information separate from the use of EITs that led to the terrorist disruption or capture. 2, information from a detainee subjected to EITs played no role in the claimed disruption or capture. And 3, the purported terrorist plot either did not exist or posed no real threat to Americans or United States interests. Some critics have suggested the study concludes that no intelligence was ever provided from any detainee the CIA held. That is false, and the study makes no such claim. What is true is that actionable intelligence that was, quote, otherwise unavailable, was not obtained using these coercive interrogation techniques. The report also chronicles where the use of interrogation techniques that do not involve physical force were effective. Specifically, the report provides examples where interrogators had sufficient information to confront detainees with facts, know when they were lying, and when they apply and where they applied rapport building techniques that were